to one and all. This is episode 28 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday evening with me. Also wanted to say how much I appreciate the support that I have received, especially for the YouTube channel. I'm shocked by the amount of views that some of the videos have gotten, videos that I really thought were to such a narrow audience, talking about, in some cases, the minutia of the movie business, but you're all responding, and I'm very grateful and thankful to have you on board. I'm super happy that you enjoy me mostly just sitting here in this room with all of these, in my opinion, phenomenal movies behind me, and in the case of Angel Heart, in front of me. But as I say, if you enjoy the YouTube channel, but you haven't yet clicked like and subscribe, please do so. You do the click and then smash that little alarm bell looking thing. Or if you're joining me for the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or the other platforms, please, if and only if you like the content, click like and subscribe. So there's a lot of chatter. Movie fans know about this. Not only a discussion among the acknowledged great filmmakers from, James Cameron, Christopher Nolan, Martin Scorsese, Spielberg, and, like the top tier, about not only what sort of weight should comic book movies be given within the industry, and is it okay that they have such a huge role in the industry, but also, and Nolan has talked about the need for physical media as opposed to just allowing evil streaming services to decide who watches what. But each of those men, at various points, in some cases very recently, talked about the importance of seeing movies in theaters. And Tom Cruise was able to do something that his fellow Tom and fellow fucking legend Hanks was not able to do. When Hanks completed the movie Greyhound for Apple, he was very disheartened that because of COVID and the situation with the movie theaters, which was very unsettled, we all remember, they decided to release that to Apple. And as much as Hanks really wanted to wait, he didn't have much of a standing. And they just released it to streaming, and he was a little disappointed about that. In the case of Cruise, he did not want Top Gun Maverick, which oddly enough was wrapped all the way back in 2019 and was scheduled for a Memorial Day 2020 release. He was able to, probably not just because he's Tom Cruise, but because he was a producer on the film and he had worked with so many of the important people involved in the production of Top Gun Maverick, that he pretty much stood on his head. Every ounce of movie star moxie and influence that he had, he used. And we've all seen stories of what they used to call in Hollywood vanity projects, where an actor exerted undue influence and it kind of blew up on everybody. This was an instance and a case where there were people who probably were hoping that Cruise would be wrong so that he would never be able to muscle. Again, he didn't threaten anybody, but he made it known that he was very confident. We just have to wait for a time where we can release this movie to theaters. I think this is a terrific film, whatever the specifics, but that was the gist. And he ended up being right. He ended up being so right that waiting was the right way. And once, we got the all clear as far as going back to theaters and let's go see a movie like in the old days. How much money did that movie make? Billion? Close to it? And 96% on Rotten Tomatoes? It's a great movie, in my opinion. Generation X, Top Gun is one of our movies, right? You think about classics of the mid-'80s, The Goonies, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, Top Gun. Those are standards for somebody like me who was, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade when these movies came out. Aliens, James Cameron's sequel. But the idea of seeing movies in theaters, it's like taking part in an event when it's a great film or something that we were all looking forward to. And so what I'm going to talk about here are my experiences seeing movies that I consider to be brand name movies, but ones that I saw in theaters, where I actually was sitting in cinemas during the original theatrical run of a film that might be 2, 3, 4, 5 decades old. And, you know, for a young person, because I remember even talking to my father, who was 31 when I was born, and there were certain kind of legendary movies that he saw in theaters, where just knowing that, man, in the original theatrical run of The Longest Day, my dad was in theaters. It's so cool. So some of the movies that I have seen and saw my much younger self in theaters are these kind of epic, iconic type films that people, maybe in many cases, younger people became fans of later. And in some cases, never understood what all the fuss was about when it comes to certain big films of the decades from the 70s forward, because I'm born December of 73. So my first experience in a movie theater, I don't really remember, is Sir Alan Parker's musical gangster film with an almost all-child cast, including Scott Baio and a very young Jodie Foster, Bugsy Malone. And so you had little kids literally playing gangsters, talking tough. Yeah, we're going to take them at you, that kind of thing. And they had Tommy guns that shot, I believe it was whipped cream. And the movie is kind of pitched at an unusual angle because it's not really a movie for kids, but it is. And it's not really a movie for adults, but I think it also is. And it's not really, that's a movie that has a very small and devoted cult following, but not like, oh my God, we have to, you have to show this to your friends and that kind of thing. But I did see Grease is the word. 1978, I was 4 years old, and family friends took me, as you would expect from me being such a cantankerous little kid, brat, if you will. I didn't want to go, and they kind of dragged me along, and I loved it. I could make up a story. No, I loved it. My first experience and exposure to John Travolta, one of the great stars ever, despite the number of bad movies that he's made. Love him. Great. New Yorker, right? Oh, no, New Jersey. Travolta's New Jersey. He's an honorary New Yorker. I saw him not that long ago at the opening of a pizzeria in Brooklyn, getting a slice and doing a dance. Great stuff. But yes, I saw Grease in theaters. And that's a movie I remember in 98 on its 20th anniversary. They rolled it back out in theaters. And this is now something we've seen a lot of. Movies getting like James Cameron's The Abyss got a 4K full restoration, the so-called special edition. I've argued previously, and when I was in film school, that James Cameron's director's cut of The Abyss is up there with his best work. It is way better than the theatrical version, which I like, but it's not nearly as good. So nowadays you're seeing The Exorcist, where I was fortunate enough to go to the 50th anniversary screening. Kenny, may he rest in peace. And Back to the Future with him as well. So the 20th anniversary of Grease, I remember being somewhat taken back by, wow, they're going to put it back into theaters, because it wasn't something that was done as much in the 90s. Nowadays, because there's so much nostalgia, these things, like 50th anniversary screening of The Exorcist, it's a lot of people there, and the movie, Back to the Future screening, same thing. So the next brand name movie that I saw, I'm really happy to be able to say this. My parents, in December of 1978, with me 4 going on 5, took me to see OG Superman with Christopher Reeve as Clark Kent / Kal-El, Gene Hackman tearing it up as Lex Luthor, and a lot of comic book purists, well, it's not really the Lex that's terrific. Hackman fucking crushes it. He's great. He's great in the first one. He's even better in the second one, where his character is almost kind of like a wild card because he's not the primary antagonist. He's not quite on Superman's side, but he is without realizing it, sort of thing. But I loved it. That was the first movie I saw in theaters, which, without realizing it, my 4 or 5-year-old brain was realizing the immense power that cinema could have at its best. And that movie transported me to another world, even though it's supposed to take place like 25 miles from where I lived in Massapequa. It was another world, another dimension. And I believed a man could fly. thanks to that movie, and thanks to the unbelievably brilliant casting decision at Warner Brothers. Now, this is another thing I talked about, not in a podcast, but just arguing with people going back to film school and elsewhere. It's not always an argument. Sometimes it's just a healthy debate, right? The casting of Christopher Reeve in Superman is, in my opinion, up there with the all-time masterstrokes of casting. Because you imagine, and this is true, again, another thing you could Google, it was not Warner Brothers' intention to do what ended up being done, which was, we will get an unknown to play the lead. So there'll be no prior identification, and if we find the right guy, it's going to work. And we'll just surround him with big stars. Now, that is the movie that we saw. That is the film which celebrated incredibly its 45th anniversary of being released in the United States, I want to say last week. The studio was not inclined to take unnecessary risks. And it seems absurd now. Henry Cavill was mostly unknown when he took the role. And certainly Brandon Routh for Superman Returns was an unknown when Bryan Singer cast him in that. Warner Brothers did not want to do that. Their idea was, we will just get a big star to play the lead to give us the best possible chance of recouping our investment, because they knew it was going to cost a shit ton of money, even 1977, 78, standards. They went for Redford. It sounds so absurd that they actually went with Robert Redford. They asked Redford. They asked Beatty. They asked Clint. Clint said he was too busy. He didn't get on anybody and didn't make any jokes and didn't make any snide remarks. He simply said he was too busy. Redford was apparently interested but wanted too much money, and I believe Beatty gave the same excuse. And Beatty was a ridiculous choice only because he was always super duper cautious about projects he would take. Like Warren Beatty, in order to pin him down to do anything, they used to say the same about Redford. With Beatty, it was even more significant. He really had to be 100% gung-ho about something to do it. And even something like Bugsy years later, he waited a long time. But James Caan was another pretty big star they went to. And James Caan just had a big laugh. Like, he was one guy who kind of dragged the production. He said, good luck getting anybody into that silly suit. I'm wearing my underwear outside and nobody's laughing at me. Like, that was his kind of, tough guy mentality. So when the big stars passed, they went and tried to find an unknown. And they found Christopher Reeve, who was extraordinary in that role. So good as Superman, even better as Clark Kent. And as I say, when I saw it in theaters, I got it. I understood. He's coming across completely different when he's wearing a suit and tie and glasses than when he's got the costume on. It's like two people. We're seeing a movie where it's two entirely different characters. And I love that movie. And Reeve, unfortunately, tragically, when he was only 42, suffered a riding accident in 1995 and never walked again. Died in the mid-2000s. And one of the truly awful, tragic things to happen, and his widow, Dana, she passed. The son looks a lot like him. But I think of Christopher Reeve, and unfortunately, because of the personal tragedy that he endured, and then his best friend, Robin Williams, who, they were so close as young people, in the 70s as struggling actors before Robin got his big break on Mork and Mindy, and Reeve got his big break with Superman. They're just grinding it out. And then both guys had such stupendous, incredible achievements and successes. And, Robin was a guy they always talked about that sometimes he was on and sometimes he was really low and down. But his friendship with Reeve was the real deal. And the famous story of when Reeve was first hospitalized, that Robin Williams just went into the hospital, like almost trying to bring light to a horrible tragedy. And he got Reeve laughing for the first time in, since his accident. But that was a movie that really kind of changed and made me want to go to the movies all the time. The next movie I saw in theaters, it's one of the ironies. My dad was a huge movie fan. huge movie fan at home. He didn't go to the movies that much when I was younger. It's a little bit unfortunate. But my parents took me to see Superman 2, which came out in 1981. And I think I liked that one on first viewing even more than the first one because of the action. And also because I was led to believe, oh yeah, they shot this in New York City. And I was like, holy shit, my 7, 8-year-old me. I couldn't believe they shot it in the city. How did people not get hurt? I was very easily duped because, movie special effects, even back then where the computer work wasn't really much. Most of the work was done during production with little models and miniatures and matte paintings and what they used to call glass shots and all of that. Stunt work sometimes could be a little bit weak, but Superman 2, saw it in theaters, fantastic. Absolutely loved it. Then I saw, with my parents, Chariots of Fire. Now, a lot of people would argue that's not really a brand name film. It's not as popular as the ones I talked about, with the exception of Bugsy Malone. And certainly, you're less likely to find this on someone's all-time favorite movies list than I think any of the other movies here. But by virtue of it winning 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, in a year of On Golden Pond and what a lot of people think should have won, well, either Raiders of the Lost Ark or Warren Beatty's Reds. But it's a brand name film. And that was my single most memorable trip to the movies of my life. Saw it either just before or just after Superman 2, but that was the out-of-body experience. The only time I've ever had what seemed like a true out-of-body experience when seeing a movie. And I was fortunate also that this movie was replayed on HBO all the time when they first got it in, which was after it had won all the Oscars. And because it's a PG-rated film, they could run it whenever they wanted. So that's the thing. Back in the day, I don't know if it's the same now, HBO never ran R-rated movies until 8 o'clock at night, and then they would run them until like 7 a.m. the following morning, if I'm not mistaken. But because this was PG, they were able to just prop it up whenever. And I come home from school, and oh my God, Chariots of Fire is on. I saw it so many times just flipping channels to HBO or Cinemax. And the next brand name film I saw after Chariots, Rocky III. Loved it, right? What a great movie. It's so over the top. It's so corny. I saw Rocky III before seeing either Rocky I or Rocky II. Just the way that it worked out. That I didn't have unlimited access to TV or whatever at that age. And unless I happened to be sitting in front of the TV and the movie Rocky came on, I wasn't going to see it. So I saw Rocky III first. And then I saw Rocky I and II at home on either HBO or Cinemax. Love Rocky III. But obviously, in an ideal world, you would watch those movies in sequence because most people would agree that Rocky I is a classic, a masterpiece, not just because it won Oscars, but that it's the best of all of the films, including the Creed movies. And I'm a fan of that series, always have been. But there are movies I had a chance to see in theaters, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, when I had a chance to see Goodfellas, punted. Had a chance to see Home Alone. This is 33 years ago, punted. But I had an opportunity to see Ghostbusters, get in on the ground floor, opening weekend. My old pal Nathaniel Klitzberg asked if I wanted to go. He was taking, his son Nathaniel. No, it's okay. I don't want to go. Back to the Future, same thing. Jerry, you want to? Nah, I'm good. I really wasn't good, but I was just a crank and didn't want to go. So I really didn't go to the movies that often. It's stunning but true. I saw Jewel of the Nile with my dad, the sequel to Romancing the Stone, which I had seen, and we both really enjoyed that, but more because the characters were fun. It's not a great movie. Romancing the Stone is better, but amazing cast, DeVito and Michael Douglas and, prime Kathleen Turner, she was such a firecracker. She was great in almost everything that she appeared in the 80s. And my dad, who is not a Trekkie, another brand name film, he took me to see Star Trek 4. He didn't know the series. He had maybe seen little bits and pieces of it. He knew who Spock was, that kind of thing. But he was not a Trekkie. But a couple of guys, and my dad was susceptible to suggestion, to use a Star Trek phrase from Wrath of Khan. He was not, if somebody at the office or more than one person said, Al, this is terrific, go see it, he would be more amenable to it. So he knew that I had mentioned, hey, maybe we could see Star Trek 4. He didn't really say anything, but a couple of guys at work said, Al, it's really good. I'm not even a fan. When somebody said, I don't know Star Trek and I love this movie, that was enough to convince him. So he took me to see Star Trek 4 at the old Piqua Theater on Sunrise Highway, Massapequa, right by the Massapequa Diner, which is still there, and across the street from the Long Island Railroad, Massapequa Station. And Dad, God bless him, love you, Dad, he really enjoyed that movie. I was in shock. That's the one where they go back in time with the humpback whales. He liked the topical humor. He was laughing throughout the film. He was not even the target audience, and he told people, yeah, wow, so that was his favorite Star Trek film. He watched Wrath of Khan, Undiscovered Country, okay, it's entertaining. And he never got into the Jean-Luc, I almost said Jean-Luc Godard, the Jean-Luc Picard, wink, wink, Patrick Stewart wasn't into it. First Contact he thought was okay. But yeah, I didn't see that many brand name movies in theaters in that era of the 80s, once you kind of get past 86. Yeah, I saw Action Jackson with my grandpa. I love it. It's so stupid. It's, a high school track star, Harvard Law graduate who ends up a Detroit cop. Okay. Yeah, but that's the world of the movie. But the next brand name film I saw Naked Gun 2. Huge fan of the original. With Grandpa Nat, when I was in Florida in the summer of 91. I got there, and then we went to Naked Gun 2.5, came out the next day. I was cracking up, and he had not seen The Naked Gun, and he was laughing. That the scene ends with what's supposed to be Barbara Bush hanging from a balcony, like in her underwear, and Grandpa was cracking up. I don't remember seeing him laugh as hard as that, as seeing, again, make-believe Barbara Bush hanging from a balcony as the music played, and he was giggling and giggling. It was great, because I was already 17. I couldn't believe he was laughing like that. And then later in that same vacation, one of my top 3 favorite movie-going experiences, Terminator 2. On its opening day, July of 1991, me and Grandpa Nat went to the first screening of a theater which is most likely long gone on Oakland Park Boulevard, kind of near the border of Lauderdale Lakes and Lauderhill, not far from Inverary, that huge Inverary Village complex, whatever. Incredible. Saw it again in theaters with my dad. Amazing. And then, through the 90s, because I say that my range of knowledge, where I have absurd amounts of trivia stored in my head, from the silent period through the 1990s, because I did, of all the decades of life, and I've had plenty, I saw the most movies in the 90s. And so the next, what you would call brand name film, brand name enough that they did a remake or a reboot recently. I saw White Men Can't Jump in theaters at the Movies at Sunrise Mall the night it opened. I want to say it was March 13th, 1992. It was definitely March. You know what? It probably was later that month, like the 26th or something, 24th. It was definitely March of 92, though. I saw that in theaters, a packed house at the Movies at Sunrise Mall, and a great experience. The audience was with it all the way. And I kind of knew at the beginning that they weren't going to set Woody Harrelson's character up to be a loser, even though the movie kind of takes great pains to show that he kind of is. He's a great hustler, but he's kind of a loser. And that's obviously a theme throughout the film. But I saw Jurassic Park in theaters, a movie that's now more than 30 years old next year. And I had read the book. The movie's not quite as good as the book, but that was a memorable experience. I saw Schindler's List with my dad. That's also now more than 30 years ago. I'm trying to think of other movies of the 90s, like big, epic type movies that now people say, man, it must have been something seeing it in theaters. So True Lies, another Arnold classic. I use that phrase in the Arnold podcast, but a terrific movie. I wish that I would have seen Total Recall in theaters, and I didn't. Die Hard 2, I forgot. I saw Die Hard 2 in theaters. Didn't see the first one in theaters. And Die Hard with a Vengeance. Loved it. Die Hard with a Vengeance to me is actually better. As much as Die Hard 2 has some incredible effects work, and Bruce is on top of his game, Die Hard 3 with Sam Jackson, just terrific. And Jeremy Irons, Great villain. And then summer of 96, seeing Mission Impossible in theaters was awesome. And seeing Arnold in Eraser, man, I'm thinking about it. I saw The Fugitive with Harrison Ford. I was going to the movies a lot. I saw 3 Jim Carrey's, 1994, his big breakout year. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber. Talk about a trifecta, man. He went from that's kind of almost a niche star where people like me knew who he was. Yeah, I'd seen Once Bitten 15 times and, in living color. And then all of a sudden, he was a superstar. Other big movies of the 90s. I saw Star Wars in early 97 when they re-released it. They put it back into theaters to kind of slowly get people geared up for the somewhat notorious prequel trilogy. But that was great to see that film on the big screen for the first time. It's a big difference seeing it surround sound on a big screen as opposed to watching even a 24-inch television. It's just not the same. Let's see what else. Oh, Saving Private Ryan in theaters, opening day with Dad at the multiplex in Farmingdale. That was so intense. During the opening horrific sequence, I was ready to leave the theater. I've never had that experience before. It was so intense that I didn't know that I could handle it. And you call me whatever names you want, but I wasn't ready for it. I read about the movie and they said, well, there's intense, sustained combat sequences, whatever. It was nothing like I expected. Felt like you were right in the middle of the battle, and that was what Spielberg was trying to do, and he succeeded massively. That is the kind of movie you never forget, though, especially seeing it in theaters where the surround sound, it literally sounds like gunshots are being fired and that there are bullets flying in your direction. I was feeling fear in the movie theater, even though I knew that there weren't any guns in the theater. I almost left. I was this close. So I gotta get out. No. Just close your eyes, keep your head down if you're really freaked out, right? Shakespeare in Love, Oscar winner later that year, saw in theaters, absolutely loved it. I know that's a polarizing pick for Best Picture because it was the year of Private Ryan, but I love Saving Private Ryan, but I have no problem with the fact that Shakespeare in Love ended up winning Best Picture. And now, historically, it is considered a bit of an outlier that was a mistake. One of many mistakes, you could say, by the Motion Picture Academy, but, it's what happened. Oh, and I should point out, amazing, I forgot about Clint. I saw some big Clint movies of the 90s. Unforgiven, which he directed, ended up winning a bunch of Oscars, including picture and director. In the Line of Fire, absolutely love it. Bridges of Madison County, horrible book, fantastic movie, Clint and Meryl Streep. And Dad and I saw Absolute Power, a best-selling book by David Baldacci, which he had read and loved. And the movie is a lot different, but he liked the movie just as much as the book. And he was somebody who could be withering in the appraisal if the book was, like Outbreak. He had loved the book. There's another 90s one I saw in theaters. He liked it, but he said, man, the book was better. The book was so good, but there was a lot of stuff they couldn't really do, in the movie. So I'm trying to think the last big movie that I saw in the 90s, 1999. I saw The Blair Witch Project, got in on the ground floor, opening night, freaked out beyond imagination. That's probably the most polarizing horror film ever made. I was just beyond like, holy shit, like what the fuck, right? That movie was, it really worked on me. I saw Star Wars Episode 1, Phantom Menace in theaters. Saw it 3 times in theaters. And that's a movie, of course, that is also very polarizing. So I feel like as far as classics and brand name films, that's pretty much it that I saw in theaters. I don't think I left any out. But, hit me up in the comments whether you're enjoying this, or I hope enjoying this podcast on YouTube. Don't forget to click like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, or on Spotify, iTunes, or any of the audio platforms. This has been episode 28 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'll be back with episode 29 real soon. Peace.